Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this invitation, particularly to the Surtees Society, for being able to speak here today. I come to the hunting issue from a somewhat different angle than my previous colleague speakers, because for many years I campaigned against hunting. I was a hunt saboteur, although I didn't wear a balaclava, as you've seen, and I opposed it. I thought it was cruel, and I thought that it was unjustified. But what I did do, I wanted to talk to hunting people, and that changed my mind. And in a sense, that's exactly what you're doing here today. You are educating people, and I commend you for it. The title of this talk is The Management of Wildlife and the Case for Hunting, because hunting fits very well into that particular heading. Opposition to hunting is nothing new. As you can see from this quote from many centuries ago, the view that people were killing for fun has been around for a long, long time. In fact, if you are killing just for fun, I think I would still oppose that. But it's that misconception of hunting that it is purely about people getting pleasure from killing an animal, and is actually much more complex and much more wider than that. In the UK, and I will limit my comments to the UK, we did have people killing for fun. Bull baiting, for example, badger baiting, bear baiting. This is where people took pleasure in an animal fighting for its life in an enclosed area. And interestingly enough, two people at the beginning of the 1800s, a chap called Richard Martin and Thomas Fowell Buxton, they campaigned very strongly for animal welfare. Martin put forward the first animal welfare law ever in 1822. They were friends of William Wilberforce, who was, of course, the anti-slavery champion. And together with Wilberforce, they actually helped form what became the RSPCA, the world's biggest animal welfare organization. But surprisingly, the two were fox hunters. Animal welfare was at the heart of what they were doing, and they knew what they were doing. You've heard earlier about the parliamentary steps, and I'm going to go through perhaps with some visual elements to hammer home the point. This is the Scott Henderson report. It's a very good report. It came out in June 1951, and importantly, it vindicated hunting. It said that a lot of opposition to hunting was exaggeration and a misconception, but importantly, it supplied a form of wording that could have resolved this had it been taken up. It's a way of preserving hunting, but also opening up to animal welfare concerns that may occur if things aren't done properly. And it's a pity, a real pity, that last point wasn't taken up. In the 1960s, we saw the formation of direct action, with hunt saboteurs taking direct action against the hunts. And in the 70s, they continued, but also it was the rise, as you've heard from Lord Mancroft, of animal rights. And even the RSPCA was infiltrated somewhat by those animal rightists who have a very different view to animal welfare. People think animal welfare and animal rights are the same thing. They're not. They are fundamentally different. The RSPCA had to withdraw that particular advert because it simply went too far, and you're not allowed to do that under charitable law in the UK. But as Lord Mancroft has also mentioned, and as Rob Williams has mentioned as well, the Labour Party were left wide open. The anti-hunting people infiltrated and got close to the Labour Party for decades, giving them enormous amounts of money, having stands at party conferences, and basically the two became one. The anti-hunting campaign became part of Labour's policy. And it was almost because the hunting world didn't take any notice. It was because of that ignorance that actually the Labour Party went down this route and became bought by the anti-hunting groups. And you can see here that some of the people aren't really interested in animal welfare. It's revenge for the miners because they thought the Conservatives closed the mines. Actually, the Labour Party closed more mines than the Conservatives ever did. But nevertheless, in the minds of left-wing MPs, that's justified. And as you heard from Lord Mancroft, that's one of the MPs who saw this purely as class war. And they use it, and they continue to use it at every election, although we know full well that nobody really votes one way or the other purely on the hunting issue. There are issues that are far more personal to them that make them vote. But nevertheless, they like to pretend, and that's a ridiculous photograph of the then Deputy Prime Minister holding up a fox, as if somehow the Hunting Act is going to save him. Well, we know differently. The Hunting Act has actually been very detrimental to the fox. Public opinion polls as well. They can be carefully worded, and for some strange reason, a lot of politicians, some of the more naive politicians, take too much notice of them. This particular poll likened hunting to badger baiting and dog fighting, two things that were made illegal in the UK in 1835. But of course, asking questions like that means that you get the answers that you want. And even people who should know better, conservationists like George Monbiot, who is a left-wing conservationist, has admitted this isn't about animal welfare. This is about class. And it only emphasises exactly what Lord Mancroft has said, that it's the people that they're opposed to. It is not concern for animal welfare. And it's a pity that the public don't see that. And we now have social media, which, of course, can do all sorts of things. Even the most stupid person can now talk to the world. And as you can see there from some of the more tamed down tweets, the hunting world is likened to the Nazi Party. It's likened to ISIS. And it's it simply is a nonsense. They have to paint you as extremists. And for people who don't look into it deeply enough, they will probably agree with that. And it's very nice to have a fanfare as well while I'm saying this. And indeed, people who should know better, academics, who amazingly liken hunting to rape and child abuse. Most of the time when you show a slide like this, people just laugh. Even ordinary people, not academics like the one you're seeing there, really find this bewildering. And of course, all it's done, quotes like that have exacerbated extremism. So you end up with people who would call for the sterilisation of all hunting people, who jeer and take pleasure when there's an accident in the hunting field and someone dies. Or, amazingly, and this one came out just a few days ago, someone who would like to get rid of all predators, as if that is physically possible. Now, that is the extreme of the animal rights movement. Yes, I accept it. But once you start saying these sort of ridiculous things, it does prove the mindset of some of the people who are involved. They want to do away with all predators so that wild animals somehow would not lead a suffering life. And I'm afraid a lot of the public are confused by all of this. And we have celebrities that obviously have a lot of followers, and it confuses the whole issue in the public's mind. One basic fact to understand is that domestic animals and wild animals are living in different states. That's why the laws that we have to protect domestic animals are pretty simple and straightforward, whereas we have numerous laws to protect wild animals because of different seasons, because of different states and different habitats and what have you. So it's much more complicated. Wild animals are not domestic animals. And in that sense, it doesn't mean to say you can be as cruel as you like. It means that you just have to treat them differently. As you've heard, again, the Burns report did not come out and say that hunting was cruel. The Portcullis House hearings, again a government inquiry, showed in a sense really that they wanted to put a scientific gloss onto an action that they were going to do in any case. They were always going to ban hunting, and the Portcullis House hearings was their means to do it. It was really a sham hearing. And there's Lord Burns himself, who said it did not prove that there was cruelty. So it's wrong to think that the Burns report supported that view. And indeed, his fellow committee members said virtually the same thing. So the Hunting Act was passed. It was passed in Parliament in 2004, took effect a number of months later. 700 hours of parliamentary time, 10 times longer than the debates when the UK was going into Iraq. It used the Parliament Act, and there's no scientific basis that's ever been brought forward to justify it. And one of the reasons that the Hunting Act is so difficult is because they could not define hunting with dogs. Because it is the hound that hunts, not the human. And as smart as hounds are, they haven't learned to read yet. And that's one of the reasons why the Hunting Act is such a failure. But you can see what you can and can't do. Basically, it affects anyone with a dog. If you allow your dog to chase a squirrel in the UK, technically you are breaking the Hunting Act. If you allow your dog to chase a mouse, don't even have to kill it, you are breaking the law. Of course, no one's going to go after you. The important thing is to remember that the people who've criticised this law are not hunters. The ones you're going to see here are legal people. They're not hunting people. They're not trying to make an excuse for hunting. They just see and understand that this is a ridiculous piece of legislation. And people who are genuine about animal welfare, the late John Hobhouse, one of the founding fathers, if you like, of the modern RSPCA, saw that the move against hunting was a tragedy. That the police saw this as a nightmare, as they say, badly drafted and hard to enforce. Civil servants put out a report some years ago and cited the Hunting Act as one of the examples of bad government. And Tony Blair, of course, himself now regrets this path that he's gone down. And as you've heard, the most senior parliamentary draftsman, Daniel Greenberg, has just laid a moral level to this debate, which said that he didn't think that's the way we did this. And for a man who's drafted all sorts of really difficult laws, including the Good Friday Agreement, he found this the most troublesome. So what has happened? For all the talk, for all the debates about hunting, one element has just not been brought forward. And you've got to ask yourself why. What has happened to the previous hunted species? And we think we know why, because, as been mentioned before, the fox population has dropped over the years by something like a third to 40%. Depends on where you are. It's different in different areas. The hare population, thousands of hares were shot out because their status had changed in the eyes of some landowners, and they didn't want to attract on the poachers, and so the easiest thing to do was get rid of them, and that's what's happened. As far as deer are concerned, in the West Country, we've now seen that, again, it's changed the attitude of some people, that they've moved from a community-based conservation process to one where individuals can now do somewhat what they like. And hounds are very good in controlling bovine TB in deer, and limiting them obviously has caused problems in that regard as well. As you can see there, you know, life isn't always pleasant, life in the wild for some animals. So they get injured, they get shot, they get deformed feet, as you see there, or they get their head entangled in some sort of, looks like a life belt somehow. You know, they need to be found and they need to be dealt with. And to limiting the Hunting Act to 2 dogs is, it just makes that whole thing more different. So that's the sort of summation of what the Hunting Act has done. It hasn't saved any lives whatsoever, and it's simply meant that a conservation process has been turned over to either a commercial process or simple pest control. This is a really important question for all hunting people. In a way, it reflects the way in which the terms of engagement in these debates have been dictated to by the animal rights people. It's implied that it's nasty hunters, nasty killers on one side, and people who care and conserve animals on the other, and that's the terms of debate which I'm afraid the media has accepted as well. But it needs one question, and it is this: do you accept that wild animals should be managed at all? If you say yes, then you've shifted their position to a point of methods. How do you do it? That's a shifting from that extreme position. If you say no, then you have to accept, the antis will have to accept, that all those points. No population control, no protection for vulnerable species, no protection for farm crops. Even vegetarians eat crops that farmers grow, so they need to be protected. No habitat protection, no disease control protection. So, you know, that's the sort of question that must be put to antis right at the very beginning. That should be the starting point. If you don't have that answer, then really you don't really understand where this person is coming from. It's very easy to oppose something. You've got to know what they stand for as well. And there's an example of those things that if you're opposed to wildlife management, then all of those things are fine. I suspect the majority of the public would certainly not go along with that. These are the sort of points that need to be put over to the public very clearly. Just to be clear as to what wildlife management is, it is to meet all of these particular points. Basically, it is to create a balance. And it's not entirely about pest control. It's not entirely about leaving things to live in the wild. Because what we want is a diverse ecosystem. The most diverse ecosystem is the healthiest ecosystem. And you can use all sorts of methods. They don't have to be lethal. You can use fencing, you can use certain implements, certain tools, but you can't do this by excluding lethal. Lethal has to be part of the menu. And who wants the countryside covered in fences or whatever? Contraception, nice idea, I suppose, but it doesn't really work for animals in the wild. For animals that are somehow caged or in a park, that may work. But it has consequences as well. And one of the things that is somewhat deceptive as well, and it's really annoying because all conservation bodies in the UK are involved in lethal wildlife control. If they're either involved in it or they support it, one way or the other. But they try to keep it quiet. They treat it like a dirty little secret, which they mustn't shout about. Because, of course, they understand that you have to, at some point, control animals in a lethal way. The Forestry Commission, for example, controls wild boar in the Forest of Dean. We have quite a large population of wild boar in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire in the UK. The wildlife trusts, who are so strong about opposing the badger cull, for example, in the battle to curb bovine TB, to save this little fella, they will cull that little fella. The red squirrel and the grey squirrel don't really get on. And so they happily will control the grey, but they don't shout about it. And what this does, what this false picture, this false grouping does, is that it means that the hunters and shooters are classified as one, and the conservationists and the carers and the animal rightists are on the other side. That is totally false. It should be the hunters and the shooters and the conservationists in one camp, and the people who don't agree with any sort of wildlife management in the other. That's the true dividing line. The RSPB, for example, kill all those animals. They kill hundreds of foxes, hundreds of deer every year, but they don't shout about it. And if they did, people would understand it even more. A fox killed by the RSPB doesn't feel any better than a fox killed by the Beaufort foxhounds. So it's a stupid argument to say that we have to do this for a better reason. They're all doing it for a good reason. So what part does hunting play in this? Well, obviously the use of dogs. We're using the dog's natural talents, the natural characteristics, for our own purposes. Sheepdog is the obvious one. But we use dogs in all sorts of ways. All ways that benefit humans. And of course companions as well. And scent is important as well. Scent isn't just a directional thing. It doesn't just say that an animal's gone from A to B. It actually tells you something about the animal. And scent is being picked up by those dogs, so they know, in a sense, which ones to go for. Something which I don't believe any other method can do. Just to sideline for a minute, rewilding in Yellowstone National Park, at the beginning of the late 1800s, the early 1900s, they wiped out the wolf in Yellowstone. But Yellowstone is a wilderness. It is not like the UK. And what happened was the elk population just exploded, and you can see there that it was virtually eating itself out of its own habitat. It wasn't easy to argue to reintroduce the wolf, but this chap did it, Dr. Doug Smith, and you can see there, he's pointing at the regeneration of the habitat because wolves brought in and brought the number of elk down. They were worried about what that would actually do, but when they examined the bones at the site of the kills, they found invariably that they were old, weak, they were sick, diseased animals that were being taken out. So basically what was happening was what nature does. It kept the herd smaller, but it kept it smaller and fitter. And we know that the chase, which is so criticised by so many people, certainly in the UK, they say, well, how would you like to be chased by a pack of hounds? Well, personally, I wouldn't, but I wouldn't like to live in a hole in the ground either, because I'm not a fox. But it is a natural process by which you determine what is the weakest, the sickest, the ones that are injured. And we don't advocate reintroducing the wolf into the UK. It's just not feasible. But what we do have is the wolf's cousin. We have the hounds, and the process is pretty much the same. So if you are in favour of rewilding, you cannot oppose hunting with hounds. It is totally illogical to have those two positions. What it's doing, of course, is actually rebalancing something that they call the trophic cascade, whereby you have apex predators at the top, meso-predators, middle predators, and the prey. We've lost in the UK the grey wolf, we've lost the brown bear, and we have the eagle in certain parts. But to use hounds, the controllable wolf, we can actually rebalance that trophic cascade. It's important to understand what the hound is doing, therefore. It's selective through its incredible scenting ability. It's testing through the chase. The chase may give people a good ride. It may be interesting and pleasurable for the horse riders, but it's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to determine weakness in the animal that's being chased. And importantly, there is no chance of wounding. It's important as well to understand what a hunt is when people say that it's just a bunch of toffs out killing for fun. Yes, there is sport. Yes, there is recreation, but they're the people who fund the whole operation. Wildlife management is done by the hounds under the control of the huntsman. And where necessary, if a fox has to be dug out, that should be the choice of the landowner, and that becomes the pest control element of hunting. But it is not just a sport, as so many people like to portray it. The fact is, the coats may be red, but hunting is certainly green. And I cannot understand why any member of the Green Party would oppose this very green activity. And if people think, well, it's wrong to chase animals because of the fear, fear is a very necessary element for wild animals. Better call it alertness rather than fear, because when a wild animal loses that fear, then it probably very soon will lose its life. So don't think of it in human terms the way we would. And if you think that an animal knows what's going to happen, knows that it's running away from death, well, obviously the animal hasn't been killed before, so it doesn't know what it's running away from. And as soon as the immediate fear has gone, then you find that those animals, let's say a fox chasing a rabbit, the rabbit will go straight back to living a perfectly normal life as soon as the fox has taken one of his fellows or whatever or gone off. So it's wrong, again, to put those human terms, anthropomorphism is what it's known, into animals. And vets, I work with a veterinary organisation, and they very strongly say that this is the natural state of wild animals. They live in a state of alertness, and these pressures are perfectly natural for wild animals. What's not natural, of course, is when you use some sort of technology that the animal can't cope with. The way forward, therefore, and I would hope that you in Hungary are in a position where you can start to think about these things, is to form your legislation that protects this very necessary process. This isn't a process that is just the least cruel, the least nasty. This is a very positive process in its own right. And if you can frame that, but base it on science, not just opinion and prejudice, and importantly, put into that form of wording a chance for people who have genuine concerns about animal welfare, people who are genuine, that think that certain aspects of hunting are wrong, then that should be included in that legislation, because what it means is that both sides win, that the hunting process is protected, but also there is a door open for people who say, on that day, that huntsman did the wrong thing, and he should be prosecuted. In the same way that, say, a farmer could be prosecuted for abusing a calf or a cow, it doesn't mean to say you do away with all farming. You prosecute that person on that day for that incident. That is the form of legislation that we need, and there is a form of wording that could very well do that. And I'll leave you with the final slide, which is from Professor Webster. I would not want people not to feel passionate about animals. It's very easy to feel passionate about. I feel passionate about animals, and I have done for virtually all my adult life. But the second point is important here. You do need understanding to know what you're doing, and so many people in the animal rights movement do not know what they're doing. So I congratulate the Hungarian government, I congratulate this exhibition for addressing that final point. That is the way forward. Thank you very much.